G'day Bomber fans. Now I was going to release my 2024 season grades today, but there has been too much trade news for me to do that. That will now be out on Friday, I reckon, but today I've got to talk about the Bombers and the potential clean out that we have going on. There is a lot to cover in this little trade update. We have some fan favourites looking more likely than not to leave the club now. We're no closer to finding any incoming targets, which I'll also talk about because I think there's a reason for that. It is looking like a pretty drastic change in scenery at Essendon under Rosa, so let's get into some news from the last few days, and also there will be more to come. Teams are starting to meet now and discuss potential trade options, so we're going to be hearing more trade news in the coming days and weeks. Trade requests are coming in left, right and centre from across the competition. There's going to be plenty of these videos coming your way, so stay tuned to the channel to hear about the club as much as possible. Alrighty, starting with the big one, Jake Stringer. Now this has really escalated. A few weeks ago it was a bit of a touchy contract situation. It turned into a full-blown contract standoff, and now according to Cal Toomey, Jake Stringer is telling people that he has played his last game for the Bombers. That is massive. It shows he now doesn't want that contract to be sewn up and fixed. He genuinely wants to leave the club. Before you hate on Stringer, I think it's fair for him to move, and it's fair for the Bombers to be moving him on. This is seeming pretty mutual right now. Essendon have Stringer tied up to a contract extension because of a games played clause. That contract would see Stringer get one more year on around $400,000 before being out of contract again. There's not much money, not much security. He clearly wants and deserves more. He almost finished top 10 in the Coleman. He played every game this year. I think it's genuinely fair for Stringer to want more security and the Bombers to be hesitant to give it to him because of our new approach under Rosa. This is a new list manager coming in and deciding what he thinks is best for the list, and signing up a soon-to-be 31-year-old for 2 years doesn't seem like a great plan for the club for the future, but it might be for another club, a premiership contending club, or maybe even Collingwood, who've shown early interest in Stringer. Craig McRae really likes Stringer apparently. Sydney were linked, but I don't know how big that one is. Melbourne have been thrown in the conversation. There's going to be at least 2 or 3 clubs that would like Stringer on the list. Clubs wanting premierships. He would be perfect for a club like that. I'd like him to stay at the Bombers. I think he's valuable still, but I also think it's not the end of the world if he does leave. It's honestly getting to the stage where you have to put the little rebuild title or asterisk next to our name if he does go, because we've already said goodbye to 3 or 4 players around that 30-year-old mark. So this is the big news. What could we expect in a trade? Probably not a lot, but the club is looking for as much draft capital as possible. So I look at recent trades to find inspiration. Taylor Adams was a mid to late second round draft pick, but I think the club would argue Stringer deserves to be a late second round draft pick, maybe early third. I'm sure that would also involve some wheeling and dealing to throw in a future pick their way to get something else back late in the draft, in the current draft. Expect a few of our deals to look like that this year as we try and build up as much draft capital as possible for what promises to be a really promising draft. Alrighty, Jayden Laverde. Now he wanted a further extension on that contract as well that runs out next year, same as Stringer. The club didn't want to do that. They told Laverde to look around if he wanted more security, and now other clubs are interested. More clubs than with Stringer actually, and that is because there is a bit of a shortage of first team key defenders going around, or depth key defenders. Now Laverde isn't a first team key defender. He is a depth player for us that was forced to play because of injuries. We saw that in round 1 when he was left out of the side. But clubs like Carlton and St Kilda and Melbourne and Geelong and even Collingwood are said to be pondering the question. I think Collingwood would be a fascinating one because they have just lost out on Mark Keane from Adelaide. They want another name down there. There's every chance that both Laverde and Stringer, who are very, very close mates by the way, those two have a little click at the club with Zach Merritt and Nick Hind, who's now gone as well. But there is every chance those two could go to Collingwood together, and the Pies would send us back more draft capital in the one deal because of it. That isn't an unreasonable suggestion. That is how quickly this story has progressed. Stringer and Laverde's situation are actually closely linked to each other's. They both met with the club on the same day to discuss their future and those extensions they wanted. Both have the same player manager, both close friends, both told to assess their options elsewhere if they wanted more security, and that is exactly what they are now both doing. This is a fascinating story. It is wild to think Stringer and Laverde, 2 players so happy at Essendon, might not be at the club anymore. Alright, some more Collingwood to talk about because they have been labelled interested in young midfielder Ben Hobbs. They've been interested in quite a few players actually, but a lot of those guys have recently recommitted to their clubs. Ben Hobbs is actually one of a few midfield targets that they have whose status hasn't changed in the last week or so. He's been contracted and hasn't got an extension, and that's a lot different for compared to an out-of-contract player to sign a new deal. That shows he wants to stay when an out-of-contract player does that, but someone who was already contracted being scouted, I mean, now I would think Ben Hobbs is one of just a few midfielders that they actually think they could still get. I think the club probably play hardball here a bit though, the Bombers. They'll drive a harder bargain for Hobbs over two guys near 30 who I just spoke of before, but I still think it's interesting regardless. There's no direct Hobbs news, but the re-signing of other Collingwood targets means there potentially could be some more down the track, so watch this space a little bit. Alright, Todd Goldstein, the news here is that he will most likely be at Essendon next year in some form. Whether it is a player role or a coaching role is yet to be decided, but he'll probably be at Essendon. Mitch Cleary has actually come out and said that Goldstein himself is really keen to play on. He thinks he can still, and there's been discussions about that, even though he lost his spot in the team. And I think we've got to remember, Goldie was brought into the club, first of all, to help our young rucks develop. If he stays on our list and doesn't play a game next year, the trade could still be a success. He is, first of all, pretty much a coach, and then after that, he's handy ruck depth. Now, the club is still tossing up what they want to do with Goldie. Under Dodoro, maybe we would have told him straight away he could stay, but things are different now, it seems, and there is a chance he is told to come back as a coach and not a player. There are probably better depth rucks around, younger depth rucks. I think the club would have to actually to find one before a decision is made though, so don't expect this to be wrapped up anytime soon. If Goldstein is delisted or retires, it would be after the club find a new ruck to replace him, and if we don't, it isn't the end of the world. He is, as of right now, our third tier ruck, but in the grand scheme of things, he's so much more than that. Just a quick little look at our draft hand. This is something I'm sure fans will be eagerly checking every day the trade period goes by. So as of right now, the only meaningful picks we have are 8 and 28, so we definitely do need to do something to be able to match a bit on Kako. That has been the case all year, and that may be why the club is content in letting guys like Stringer and Laverde go earlier than we may have been thinking they would be going, kind of like a premature retirement, preparing for the future a bit. Not a rebuild, but I guess sort of in the same vein. If we get deals done for Stringer and Laverde, we would have enough draft capital to match a bit on Kako, but this is a very good draft that we should be more involved with, and that is why I do not think we're going to be active at all in this trade period. We were linked with free agents earlier in the year, but we haven't been in any trade discussions recently at all, incoming trades that is, and the reason for that is we just simply cannot afford to get anything done while protecting our draft hand. I know it's going to be frustrating for some seeing the trade period go by quietly, or maybe even the opposite. It's loud, but the noise is all around players leaving and other teams are involved getting stars in. That might be frustrating, but believe me, with Tasmania looming and our list getting older, that is 100% the right approach. I would hate if we wasted this draft hand on a mature player that would be 30 by the time Tassie are in the comp. The best thing for the club to do right now is build on this draft hand, and that seems to be what we're doing. Yes, ideally I want Stringer to stay in an ideal world, but I have full faith that Rosa is making the right decision now, protecting the future. Because in 3 years' time, the draft is going to be saturated. Young players will be harder and harder to bring in. That is why this year, with such a good draft, this is a very good draft, it is important to be active. Alrighty, real quick before I go, Essendon will need to replace Laverde and maybe Stringer and some other players if they do leave the club, but we'll need to do so without wasting draft capital, without trades. So I'm going to look at some bargain options, potential delisted free agent options for a few positions. These guys are not guys to be keen for. These are some pretty average players, but their depth. So we're going to start with some forwards. Sam Day has been delisted from Gold Coast, so he would be free. He is, however, a much taller player than Stringer, but he gives us some form of depth. Tim Membry is also an unrestricted free agent, but probably a bit more expensive from a contract viewpoint. Noah Cumberland's an interesting one. He probably stays, but he's a younger key forward who can be pried away for nothing as well. Some defenders, Josh Rotham at West Coast is someone Cal to me named. Caleb Marchbank at Carlton is in a pretty similar position. Josh Shackey has been delisted on ground level because we've lost about 300 general defenders. You got Riley Bonner at St Kilda, who was a surprise delisting. Ben Patton at St Kilda is a trade option, but would be very, very cheap, probably even a future fourth or something. He might even be delisted actually by the time I release this video or next in a few weeks. In any case, Goldie leaves. You have Tom Campbell, who was delisted at St Kilda as well. Now these are guys not to get excited about. It's just the fact we need depth and draft capital, so the club's opting to get rid of some first team and fringe players, and we need to replace those guys in a cheap way. I'm pretty sure we sign up a reject from somewhere, but only because we have to for depth reasons. I don't mind it, to be honest. You need depth. Some of these guys are handy. Some are pretty ordinary. We'll see what happens. And that is that. Really, really interesting month coming up. I'm sure I'll be making plenty of these videos. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'm sure plenty of you guys already know the news and just want to chat, so go for it in the comments. Knock yourselves out. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and go Bombers.